Welcome to the Chasing Spirituality podcast. I'm your host, Megan, and I'm so excited that you're joining me today. Each episode is full of heartfelt and expansive content that will really help you expand your consciousness and grow as a person. I created this podcast because I wanted to share my own personal experiences on my spiritual journey, but I also wanted to meet others and have them share what they've been through and how they've gotten to where they are today. If you haven't done so already, it would really mean a lot to me if you could rate and review the podcast. This really helps the podcast grow and reach more people, but it also allows me to get more guests on the show. Now on to today's topic. Hey guys, it's your host Maggie, and I'm so excited that you're back for another episode. Today I'm going to be talking about something that is very important within not only the spiritual community, but I also feel like it's really important when it comes to practicing witchcraft as well. So if you're a listener to my normal podcast or you're normally just here for Witches Wednesday, I really think that this episode is going to benefit you either way. So we're going to be talking about the inner child. More specifically, we're going to be talking about inner child healing, inner child trauma and wounds, and really what the inner child is. A lot of people that practice witchcraft or are in the spiritual community, they stumble upon inner child work or inner work. They also hear the term often called shadow work, and inner child is a big part of shadow work. And the reason of this is because a lot of our trauma and our wounding comes from childhood. So I want to start by saying you don't have to remember the trauma you experienced as a child to heal it. You don't have to experience big T trauma for you to have a traumatized inner child or an inner child wound. A lot of people think, well, my childhood wasn't that bad. I had good parents, or I had decent parents, or I wasn't abused or, neglected or anything, to the extreme. But that doesn't mean that you haven't suffered some kind of traumatic experience as a child. And the main reason for this is because children experience things differently. Children do not experience things the way that a matured adult experiences things. So don't disregard yourself. Don't disregard your experiences or your feelings, because I would say 95% of people have some kind of inner child wound. Now, if you did experience some trauma as a child, or maybe you didn't have the best upbringing, or you had some circumstances that happened to you in childhood that were more severe, then you can definitely be experiencing some of that inner child wounding today. So first, I want to say that psychology even mentions inner child. Psychology defines the inner child as a sub-personality that lives in the subconscious mind. And basically what this means is it's a part of our personality that we are unaware of. We're not aware that it exists. That is how psychology defines it. And there are many, many psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists that do inner child work. If you have, some deeper rooted trauma, some big T trauma, or things like that, you may want to consider getting professional help for these issues, and there's nothing wrong with that. Even if you haven't experienced big T trauma, you still may be drawn or feel comfortable with speaking to a professional, and I encourage you to do so. This episode is more specifically going to go into the spiritual perspective of the inner child. For me, I have a lot of inner child wounding and a lot of inner child trauma that I have dealt with, that I have worked through, and that I'm still working through. And the spiritual perspective for me, I feel, is very, very important. This is not negating the psychological aspect to it. That is also important. And like I mentioned, if you feel drawn to seeking professional help, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and you should be proud of yourself for acknowledging that. But from a spiritual perspective, the inner child is more than just a subpersonality, because it has its own energetic frequency. And the inner child frequency resides in our lower 3 chakras. So most of the time we can identify a inner child wound by looking at our first chakra. I have not done a chakra episode yet, but I'm going to do one in the future. If this is something that you are interested in, just shoot me an email. In the meantime, I will talk about the root chakra, which is the first chakra, a lot in this episode. And you can expect a future episode from me going into all of the chakras, and you can also find plenty of information out there. You can Google more information on the chakra system, and there's also great spiritual teachers and leaders out there that have a lot of information. So the root chakra is our first chakra. It's also called the Muladhara chakra. I believe I said that correctly. And it is our foundation. It's the foundation chakra. You will hear a lot of spiritual teachers tell you that if there are blockages or imbalances within the first chakra, then it's going to throw off all of the others. So think of like your bones. Without your bones, you wouldn't be able to stand. You wouldn't be able to move and bend, and you would just be a mushy pile of nothing. Well, that can be very similar to our first chakra, because it is the base of your whole system. And this is typically where the inner child energy is housed. The inner child is born here because this is our first chakra that we develop in the womb. We come into earth living in this chakra. This is our most developed chakra. This is where we are born, and this is where we live at energetically as a baby and usually as a child. The first chakra represents our security, our safety, stability, and it is our need to depend on a tribe to survive. Babies cannot be left alone or they wouldn't survive. They need their tribe. They need their parents, their mother, their father, their family. And this is the same for all mammals. Mammals all need a tribe in some way to take care of them until they reach an age or a maturity in which they can take care of themselves. And this makes us different from other species like turtles and snakes, where they just leave the egg hatches, and then it makes its way to living on its own. So this chakra is also referred to as the tribal chakra. This is where you first learn about love. It's where you learn how to care for others and how others care for you, and how support works and how to rely on your support system. This is also where all of our programming comes from when it comes to those things. All of our programming about love and support and family come from our first chakra, which is developed in childhood. So if you did not have the best examples growing up for love and support and family, then that's where you get some of these inner child wounding and inner child trauma. Children learn and absorb everything. And as they're learning and as they're absorbing everything, it gets imprinted in this first chakra. not only can you absorb and learn everything from your caregivers and your family, but this also applies to ancestral trauma and ancestral beliefs. So if you can think of really any dysfunctional beliefs, any dysfunctional programming that may be within your family, whether it's, your parents directly or, a caregiver, someone that you spent a lot of time with, your grandparents, all of that gets absorbed by you as a child and then gets stored and imprinted in that first chakra. But you have to remember that all of this information is also part of your subconscious mind. So you're not going to consciously be aware of all of these limiting beliefs and all of this dysfunctional programming. And if you don't heal the root chakra, then you're going to stay looking at the world from the root chakra perspective instead of moving up the chakras like we're supposed to. Once we develop that root chakra and we feel safe and secure and stable, we are supposed to then move into our second chakra and then our third chakra, so on and so forth, and then slowly work on developing and balancing all of them. But if you have a lot of dysfunction within your family or within your childhood, or for some reason you never felt safe and heard and secure, then you're going to stay in that root chakra and you're never going to fully be able to develop the others. And this is where you may notice some limiting beliefs. You may notice these things come up especially when you're triggered. And you may notice childlike behavior when you're triggered. And that's because your root chakra is underdeveloped or it's imbalanced and blocked. Just like a child throwing a temper tantrum, if you become triggered in your relationships, this is a big sign of root chakra trauma. The root chakra is also about experiencing things through the body. So imagine your 5 senses and imagine, a baby. When a baby starts to develop, it's putting everything in its mouth. It's learning how to crawl and walk and, bend and move its head. This is how that child is learning. This is how that child is developing and absorbing everything around. It is taking everything in through its body. So you can also pinpoint first chakra blockages and imbalances or inner child trauma within that first chakra if you see a lot of signs of being in the body constantly. This can obviously look many different ways. That can, resort in different eating disorders or eating issues, addictions, smoking, things like that, because that's going to be associated with, your taste and putting things in your mouth. And like I mentioned earlier, not everything has to be, big T trauma to be considered an inner child wound. There are other things that can be programmed within our subconscious, within that first root chakra, that we are unaware of, and that, may look like judgment, racism, homophobia. These things are also passed on to us from our family or our, ancestors, and they are still programmed within that first root chakra because we still absorbed them as a child. And outwardly, you may express that, no, you're not racist, or you're not homophobic. But if you've never done inner child work and you've never healed and released those imprints, then they're still inside of that root chakra. They're still inside of your subconscious. and you still have to release them for them to be gone completely. Okay, so now let's talk about how do you know if you have inner child wounds or first chakra trauma. First, I'm going to tell you that the chances of you having some sort of wound, even on a small scale, is very, very likely. Most people have inner child wounds just because of the way that we interpreted things as a child. And this is because when you are a child, probably under the age of 10, you have a very egocentric view on the world and what is happening around you. And what I mean by this is everything is from a me perspective. So when something bad happens, or when someone treats you unfairly, or they maybe are having a bad day or in a bad mood and they yell or they do something that bothers you or hurts you in some way, as a child, you're not thinking rationally or like an adult would, and you don't always see the big picture. You are thinking about it in a way that blames yourself. An example of this, say dad comes home from work and starts huffing, puffing, throwing things around while he's cleaning up the kitchen, maybe has a harsh tone, maybe even yells, and immediately that child is going to be thinking things like, well, what did I do? What did I do wrong? How did I make dad angry? Why doesn't dad like me? But the reality is it may have not had anything to do with you. It may not have anything to do with the child. Dad just had a bad day at work, or dad's tired, or dad got fired. There's a multitude of reasons that make people act in ways that are out of normal, or, that make them act more ill towards people. It doesn't have to be an extreme trauma for it to have traumatized the child. And that's because of the way the child is interpreting the world. So, one of the things that you can do to find out if you have inner child wounds and you aren't really sure is ask yourself, certain questions. Did you experience childhood trauma? Do you remember anything that stands out to you that, you still have a strong memory for? Was it something scary that happened? Something sad that happened? Did you experience the loss of a loved one, of a parent? You can ask yourself questions like that if you're not sure. Or you can ask yourself things like, did you feel safe? Did you feel loved or nurtured? Did you feel like you belonged or that you were accepted by your family? Because these things can also cause inner child wounds. Me growing up, I didn't necessarily experience a lot of physical abuse from my parents, but I did experience the feeling of abandonment, of rejection. I was very neglected. I didn't, feel nurtured. I also didn't feel safe, but that was for different reasons. There are people who, maybe their siblings don't feel the same way that they do. Maybe their siblings feel like they had amazing parents and that they had a great relationship with their parents. But for some reason, maybe you didn't. Maybe you just felt like the black sheep of the family. You felt like you couldn't fit in, or that you weren't accepted for who you were, or you just didn't feel as loved as the rest of your siblings did. And this happens in families, and it's not necessarily something that you did, or it's not even necessarily something that your parents did. Sometimes it's not that our parents didn't love us or didn't care about us or treat us the way that we were supposed to be treated. Sometimes it just wasn't what we needed as a child, and that's okay. You can discover that you have these inner child wounds and still love your parents and still hold space for them and know that they loved you the best way that they could. They loved you the only way they knew how. You don't have to tear them down or hold them accountable. In fact, you don't even have to know all of the details. So the next thing that you can do is look at your triggers. This is very important, and it's very, very helpful for the types of wounds that are in your subconscious that you're really unaware of. And you really want to look at your triggers, especially in your relationships. And the more intimate the relationship, the more intense the trigger is going to be, and that's going to pinpoint what kind of programming you have in your root chakra. So I've talked about limiting beliefs before, and this kind of goes hand in hand with that. A lot of our limiting beliefs were developed in childhood. They are programmed in that root chakra. So when you become triggered, that's when you start questioning it. Why are you triggered? What are you actually feeling? What is beneath the surface? Because normally when we get triggered, we react the way that we always react. Maybe you throw a temper tantrum like a child. Maybe you start acting very emotionally immature. Maybe you start, attacking because that is your line of defense. But what's really happening is that little child that is inside of you, that little wounded child, is afraid, is scared. For whatever reason, whatever happened to you as a child, whatever wounds that you have, they are bringing that little child out of you. And because that little child is wounded and unhealed, that child is afraid. And that child is going to act out and lash out. So, just an easy example, say you're with your partner and your partner doesn't return your phone calls or your texts for some time. And when you finally talk to your partner, your partner apologizes, tells you that something came up, they were busy at work, their phone died, whatever the reason. But you're still triggered. You're still in that triggered state. So you're upset. Maybe you're angry. Maybe you ignore your partner. Well, that is a form of shutdown. You are shutting down communication, shutting off your emotions. You're refusing to speak to your partner. You're pouting. You are pouting like a child. Maybe you are irate and angry. So even though your partner has a logical reason, you cannot hear it. You are not to be reasoned with because you are triggered. You are angry. So you're throwing that childlike temper tantrum. But, however you react, you're reacting in a triggered way because your body is in a fight or flight response. And this is very hard to do, but if you are able to just take a quick second to become aware that you are triggered, you can then start to slowly calm yourself down enough to stop the conversation, to defuse and let it de-escalate. And then you can really start to go within and ask yourself, why are you so angry? Or why are you shutting down? What is this stemming from? What is underneath the surface? And then maybe you'll get to deeper results and you'll hit those inner child limiting beliefs that you have. Well, maybe when your partner didn't respond, didn't call you back, didn't communicate with you, it made you feel abandoned. It made you scared. You were afraid that you were going to, be left again. Your triggers can look different. You could be depressed. You may have anxiety, self-esteem issues, phobias, anger, destructive behaviors or addictions, and even chronic illness. These are all things that childhood trauma and inner child wounds can cause. Our inner child wounds, they create contradictions with our true self. And this causes us to be out of alignment, and it creates our separate self, which is our ego. And our ego is an illusion. It's not the true self. It is a compilation of all of the limiting beliefs that we have accumulated. So remember that when you're triggered, that's not truly who you are. It is the limiting belief that you have fighting against your true, authentic self. Your true self knows this isn't really me, but those limiting beliefs are buried so deep that they're battling against each other. You just have to choose the correct side. The next thing that you can look for signs of inner child wounds is look for the signs of an unbalanced or a blocked root chakra. There are tons of resources that you can, look up the different signs and symptoms of blockages in unbalanced root chakra, but some things that are really obvious signs. Are you controlling? If you are constantly trying to control everything around you, your outside environment, the people around you, that is a clear indication of a problem in the root chakra, because you do not feel safe, you do not feel secure and stable, so you are trying to control your environment so that you feel safe. The next thing is a fear of abandonment. Are you afraid of loved ones leaving you? Whether you're afraid of them, leaving you, like breaking up with you, or are you even afraid of them dying or something happening to them? Another sign is, are you afraid of being sick? That goes right along with controlling. You're trying to control your well-being, your outcome. Do you feel like you belong? Some other symptoms, impatience, restlessness, problems in the legs, feet, rectum, tailbone, immune system, male reproductive parts, and the prostate gland. Other signs, eating disorders, discomfort in the body, not whether that's pain or stiffness, but that could also be more mental. Are you comfortable in your body, or are you insecure in your body? Sciatica pain and money and financial worries. Again, money and financial worries will go back to the controlling thing. There are many different ways that we try to control our outside environment, which you have to just kind of look at your situation and ask yourself, well, how are you trying to control the things around you? It can be money and financial issues. It can be the way that you organize or upkeep or clean your home. It can be your partnerships, your relationships, your children. These are all ways that you are trying to control your environment because they make you feel safe when you can control them. So the best way or the best advice that I have to going about healing these wounds is identifying them. Like I mentioned earlier, when you can bring awareness to your inner child wounds, you can then overcome them. You don't necessarily have to remember where the wound came from, but if you can at least start paying attention to the fact that they are there because they are triggering you or they are causing you to have, these blockages within your root chakra or these issues in your life, you can make the decision that these patterns, these behaviors, these beliefs no longer serve you. And then you can release them and heal from them. If you want to try other methods, there are inner child healing meditations. There are plenty out there. I know there's some on YouTube. I've done some myself that are very helpful to help you connect with that inner child. I'm going to probably create a few myself, and I will share them here on the podcast. Another thing that you can do that will help, and you can do it in combination with bringing awareness and with the inner child meditations, is just trying to connect with that inner child. The inner child is the part of you that is innocent and joyful, the part of you that likes to play, is very childlike and imaginative and excitable. So try to connect to that little person that lives inside of you. They are still there. And if you've experienced severe trauma, they may not be very trusting of you. They may fear adults. So it may take some work for you to really connect to that little you and get them to trust you. And a lot of inner child meditations will help you start to gain the trust of that little child. One way you can gain the trust of the little child is, by letting the child express itself the way that it wants to. Think about the things that you enjoyed doing when you were a kid. Did you like running around outside, riding bikes? Did you enjoy art? What movies did you like? What activities did you like to do? And start bringing those back into your life and having fun. Imagine a child playing and just being so carefree. Try to bring that part out of you. That's going to help build that relationship back with the little child so that the little child can trust you again. The next thing that you can do is to support yourself. Be more compassionate and loving when you are triggered, when you are having a breakdown, you're having that temper tantrum. Think about how you wish you would have been parented. Think about how you would parent your own child. And do that for yourself. A lot of times we didn't get the support or the love or the nurturing that we needed. So it's not too late for you to do that for yourself now. Just because you're an adult, again, like I mentioned, that part of you still lives inside of you. That little child is still there. So it's not too late for you to reparent that child. There are different techniques that you can add to this reparenting. Some people like to look at a picture of them when they were little. I think this is definitely a really helpful tip to get you to really connect to that little you. You can carry it around with you, or you can just put it somewhere that you look at, maybe often or a few times a day. Some people like to put it maybe on their mirror where they look when they get up in the morning, maybe, where they brush their teeth. That way they're at least, looking at their childhood self at least a few times a day. And, if this doesn't sound too woo-woo for you, and I hope that it doesn't because you're listening to Chasing Spirituality, talk to it. Look at that picture a few times a day and talk to your little self. Ask your little you, how do you feel today? Are you triggered? Are you upset? Is something bothering you? Is there something I can help you with? Do you feel safe? Let that little child know that he or she is safe. That you're here now. And that even though you weren't there when they were little, or they didn't have someone there to protect them when they were young, or to nurture them, or care for them, or love them, that you're here now, and that you can do that for them now. Because sometimes that's all you need to hear. Think about the things that you wish you had when you were a kid. What kind of support do you wish you had? What kind of things do you wish you were told? What kind of things do you wish your parents did for you or said to you? And now do those things for yourself. Say those things to yourself. That's going to reopen that connection with that inner child, and that's going to help you work through some of those deeper subconscious wounds and really heal them and release them. Some people who have experienced severe childhood trauma may also experience soul loss. This is really common in children who experienced severe abuse, even physical and sexual abuse. And if you think that you may have experienced soul loss, then all these techniques will be very, very helpful for you, but you will have to work a lot harder, and it will take a lot longer, and you will really have to work to make that little you trust again. There are some really good guided meditations for this kind of work. It's called soul integration or soul retrieval, and that's where you can go kind of on a meditative journey and retrieve those fragmented parts of your soul and integrate them back into your life. You can also do this through a shaman. So if you want more support, you can look up some shamans, maybe some online or some in your local area, and see if there are any that you resonate with that can do work in soul retrieval. If not, if that's something that you're not open to, I know that kind of stuff can get pricey. So again, if that's something that is just not available to you right now, I would just recommend doing everything that I mentioned above, and also looking into some of those meditative journeys. I will hopefully try to get some of those out in the future. When I was working on my own inner child wounds, I did some meditative journeys, and I would also have a journal in front of me, and I would do like channeled writing, and I would try to channel that little inner child so that when I connected with my inner child, the inner child could then let me know what she was feeling and thinking so that I could release it. It's not really necessary. You don't have to know what you experienced. You don't have to remember your trauma to release it. But if that's just something that you're feeling called to do, I would recommend having a journal ready in case your inner child does open up and decides to start speaking to you. That's kind of what happened to me. I was doing some inner child work for a very long time, and I stumbled across some meditations that I really liked, and I kept, trying to connect with my inner child, and I felt like I was connecting with her, but I didn't feel like she was really ready to tell me everything or to let me know how she felt. She was still very guarded, which is normal. Someone gets hurt, someone doesn't trust, they're going to be guarded. So expect that from your inner child. And then one day, out of nowhere, when I wasn't even meditating to connect with my inner child, I was just doing a normal meditation, I started having all of these visions and thoughts about things that happened to me as a child, and it was almost like a playback. And I started writing it all down. And after that, I could feel the release. I felt so much lighter, and I could feel that really healed that little girl inside of me. So some of these tips and tricks and practices, they take time. It's not going to be easy every time. It's not always going to happen really quickly. It takes work. So just, stick with it, work at it, and try to build back that relationship. Try to show that little you that he or she can trust you and that he or she is safe now. And eventually you'll start to see progress more and more. Let me know if you guys are interested in some inner child meditations, and I'll see what I can come up with. Wait, before you go, I want to share how you can receive a free reading with me. Listeners of the podcast, if you go and leave me a review on Apple and then send me that review to chasingspirituality.com, you can get a chance to win a free reading of your choice. This can be psychic or mediumship. Once a month, I will choose one of the listeners to receive the reading, and I won't pull your name out of the drawing until you're chosen. This will help the podcast grow, but will also allow me to give back to my listeners. Hope to hear from you soon. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you love. And it would mean so much to me if you could rate, review, and subscribe so that the podcast can reach and assist more people. Until next time, I'm sending you so much love.